Just kidding. There's only me, your instructor. I'm going to talk about memory today, as you can see on the board. And that's probably an event that you'll be a little surprised by and remember. Why would you remember something as corny as a Halloween mask? Well, it was unexpected. It was bright and colorful. It was out of character for what you've been seeing in these videos. And in evolutionary terms, it might have been something that might have been scary that you need to pay attention to help save your life, right? Well, let's talk about memory from a variety of angles today. And we're going to talk about both the physiology of memory a little bit, and certainly the psychology of it, how it applies specifically to us in eyewitness testimony, court cases, things of that nature, things that are very practical in our everyday life. And then we'll end with an example of a very practical application to how to improve one's memory. If we look at memory, it is covered pretty clearly in your textbook in terms of being a sensory memory, which is a very short, few seconds at the most. The next level is most of that information, like if this represented all the sensory information that hits you. Of course, we don't remember most of it. And contrary to what a lot of hypnotists who are really entertainers tell you, they tell you remember everything you've ever seen. That's simply not correct at all. Then some of that gets into the short-term memory that lasts from minutes. We used to think it only lasted minutes, but now we know that some short-term memories may bounce around the part of the brain that they're in that I'll talk about in a second for a year or more. And that would be represented by many few items that were stuck in the short-term memory. And then there are some things, perhaps like that mask, that are memorable, unusual, scary, different enough, or important enough to you that they get transferred to the cortex for long-term memory. And that would be many fewer things. And then, of course, when you try to retrieve all this, you know, some days it's on the tip of the tongue, you can't quite pull it out. Some days you don't pull it out at all. Some days it seems to be gone forever. And when we retrieve it, there's even fewer items that are left. So that's kind of a quick overview of memory. The sensory memory, we filter out a great deal. The short-term memory, you know, if you try to dial a phone number and you're sitting there, you rehearse it, right? Keep saying it over and over and over, and your little kid brother comes up and interrupts you and you go, oh darn, I forgot it. You have to look it up again. Well, that's short-term memory. Then a few things get placed into longer-term, that was sensory memory rather, than a few things get placed into short-term memory, and then fewer things get placed into long-term memory transferred out to the cortex, and then we retrieve even fewer things. Now if we look at the physiology of memory, we have to look at this particular chart. This art is courtesy of Brooks Cole Publishers, by the way. And if we look at the physiology of memory, you can see from, like if you were looking at the half of the brain from the right-hand side, you can see this is the upper cortex, and that outer cortex is where the memory is generally end up for long-term memory. And you'll see things like the cerebellum, which is right at the back of your head and things of that nature. But there are two areas I want to point out. And one is the amygdala, which is A-M-Y-G-D-A-L-A, and that's right here. The amygdala is right here. And this other thing around it is the hippocampus. The circular thing that goes around it is the hippocampus. And let's talk about that a little bit, because it will have an impact on the understanding of why memory is so different than we often conceive it. So we've got the amygdala, and that has a lot to do with the emotions of fear and anger. Fear and anger. And obviously we want to remember things that make us fearful or angry because we're going to try to deal with those in the future in some way. So the amygdala does that, and notice where it's located on this chart. It's located right here, and it's right at the end of the hippocampus. And for many of our memories, we actually have two distinct memory systems, but for many of our memories, in fact most of our memories, the hippocampus is where memory goes for short term and then gets bandied about, and some of it then gets placed out into the cortex for long-term memory. So notice the hippocampus and the amygdala are in this center of the brain, which some people call the reptile brain. And while that's not scientifically accurate, it's kind of a neat name because it gives you an idea of what it does. It does some of the same things that a reptile would do. A reptile is very good at fighting. A reptile, or fleeing, depending on the species, or both. are feeding and having sex. Some people call that the fourth F, but I'll leave that to your imagination. And so we've got our memories embedded into a very primitive part of the brain that are highly emotionally charged. So when memories go into our system, they're not like a computer, they're emotionally charged. When we bring them out, we emotionally reconstruct those. So it means our brain is not like a computer when it comes to memory. It has some parallels, but our brain and our memory is far more complex and convoluted than a computer memory. So let's take a look at that a little bit closer. Okay, so we've got the amygdala and the hippocampus. Let me give you an example of how emotionally charged memory is and then give some reasons why it is that way. There's an example where there was a gentleman bandit, and he had robbed store after store after store. He was extremely well groomed. He was very polite to people. He's extremely nice. And so the media gave him the name the gentleman bandit. Well, one eyewitness, absolutely without a doubt, identified a local priest as this gentleman bandit. 6 more people came forward and identified this priest as a gentleman bandit. And the priest is just protesting right and left that he wasn't the one, he had nothing to do with it. You can't believe there are all these eyewitnesses. And these people weren't lying, they were absolutely convinced they were right, until another guy came up, volunteered that he had been the one who had committed all these crimes, and then they had forensic evidence that proved that he was the one. They had a trial undergoing already for the priest, and they had to release him. Well, how could 7 eyewitnesses be wrong? We think of juries making judgments based upon eyewitness testimony, and they put a lot of weight in that because if we see it, we believe it. The reality is the memory is emotionally charged, it's constructed emotionally, and it's reconstructed emotionally. One of the things that happens is that reconstruction changes our memories. So the second thing that happens, the first thing that happens is memory is reconstructed. That's one of the reasons it's not just like a videotape that we replay and we get every piece accurate and remember everything exactly like it is. Second is called source monitor errors. And what that means is at the time the crime is being committed, for example, or whatever we're trying to remember is being committed, or is happening at the time rather, we might pull a face from one person and our memory plop it onto the body of another person. That sounds very strange, but let me give you an example. There's a young lady who was raped, and she absolutely positively identified this one guy as the guy who raped her. Well, come to find out, forensic evidence didn't match at all. He was clearly not the person that did it, and he had an ironclad alibi because he was on TV, local TV station at the time that she claimed she was raped, and of course she was raped. What happened? She was watching that TV program when an intruder occurred and raped her, and she transposed the face of the guy on TV onto the body of the guy who actually raped her. That's how strange our memories are. And then finally, we distort the facts, we distort memories after the fact. And the classic stuff there is a police officer who's not good at interviewing techniques, then is sure somebody's guilty and plants some clues unintentionally or unconsciously for the person that's being interviewed saying, who did this? And then once that person makes that identification, particularly in a lineup, then they're sure that person's the one who did the crime, and that's embedded in their memory forever. And then of course they will, without lying, be absolutely positive their eyewitness testimony was correct. So we distort the memories after the fact. Interviewing techniques are absolutely important to do correctly. There's an example that really illustrates this rather nicely. One of the famous researchers in this area is Elizabeth Loftus, L-O-F-T-U-S. Elizabeth Loftus has done all kinds of stuff that shows the emotional nature of memory. One of her favorite things that she's done, and she's videotaped, and the videotape has a more accurate memory than the class, is when she's teaching a large introductory class of psychology or something of that nature. She'll prearrange and have an actor come running in and get in an argument with her, or have an actor run in and grab her purse and then run out. And then she'll just act, Elizabeth Loftus will act like, you know, it's all real and everything, and she'll stop and say, well, I've got somebody calling the police, but would everybody here write down what the guy with the mustache looked like? Now, the guy didn't have a mustache, but the vast majority of the class draws a picture or writes down about the guy, what he looked like, and that he definitely had a mustache or a beard or whatever she happened to put in there. When she's done studies, and others like her have done studies about car crashes, and you show a videotape of a car crash, and you say, and then you ask people to remember it afterwards, and you plant the idea, well, what happened when the glass shattered? Well, in the particular videotape, no glass broke whatsoever, and yet people remember almost to a person that the glass shattered. So we can manipulate memory quite dramatically. So the nature of memory is very different from a computer. It's emotionally input, it's emotionally pulled out, and it really makes us a very interesting organism because of that. Now let's take a look at one final thing here that has to do with memory tricks or mnemonic devices. Memory tricks or mnemonic devices. And there's all kinds of different ones. These can help you study or help you make a grocery list or something. But let's just use one called the method of LOCI. And it's spelled L-O-C-I. What does that root word look like to you? Well, it's location, same root word as location. And this was used by a Greek guy giving a speech over 2,000 years ago. And what he did is he made up the different topics of his speech, and he walked from room to room in his particular building and then was able to deliver the speech in order. Let me take you through my house and try something, and I'll use some outrageous language on purpose. I'll use some very colorful language. I'll use some sound devices in here. Let's pull all those out. Let's say you walk into my house, and the first room you walk into is the kitchen. And the first thing you do is you notice I'm a pretty lousy housekeeper, and there's honey dripping down the side of the toaster. Now think about that texture of honey. You look over to your right, there's a big table, there's two huge Labradors, and they're eating dog food off the top of the table. You're going, gee, many crickets, this guy's a sloppy housekeeper. Then you look down into the living room, and you see sugar in this 1970s shag carpeting. Sugar in the shag carpeting. You see an orange on the green carpet, or rather on the green couch, sorry. See an orange on the green couch. Then you look over the windows and you're kind of chagrined already, and you see peanut butter. Imagine the smell of peanut butter, the taste, the texture of peanut butter. You see peanut butter ground into the curtains. And then one last thing, you look over to the fireplace, and in the fireplace is ice cream. Ice cream's in the middle of a flame. You're exasperated. You know, what's wrong with this guy? You walk up the stairs, and on each stair is a piece of bread. You get to the top and you take a left. What do you see? You see pork chops floating in the bathtub. You walk into my kitchen, into my bedroom rather, kind of exasperated to say the least, and you see milk dripping down the dresser drawers. And then the final straw that just drives you out of the house and says, my God, this guy's really sloppy, is you see potato chips in the bedding. Now take just a second and try to write that list down. Just think about it. Walk through the rooms, visualize, listen, carefully look at what you see, do it in order. I'll start you out. You're in my kitchen. What do you see? You go to my living room. You see several things. What do you see? You walk up the stairs. What do you see on each stair? You turn left and you see what? Floating in the bathtub. And then finally you go into the bedroom, you see something dripping down the dresser drawers, and something's in the bed. Now this is an absolutely meaningless list, and my guess is after one time going through that most of you will remember a lot of these items, about 90% of the items, weeks down the road, and it's totally meaningless. Let's go through what you saw there. You were in my kitchen, what'd you see? Honey on the toaster, dogs eating dog food, right? So we're making a grocery list. We need honey, we need dog food. You go into the living room, there's sugar in the shag carpet, there's orange on the green couch, there's ice cream in the fireplace, there's peanut butter in the curtains. Geez, what a mess. You go up the stairs and you see bread on each stair. You go in the bathroom, what was floating there? Pork chops, right? And then finally, you go into my bedroom, there's milk dripping down, and the dresser drawers, and then there's potato chips in the bedding. So, now why did all this work? Well, you've got highly colorful things, an orange on a green couch. You've got highly unusual things, ice cream in a fireplace with the fire going. You've got texture, like peanut butter on a curtain. You've got alliteration, sound memory, sugar in the shag carpet, sugar in the shag carpet. So you've got strikingly unusual things, things that have sound, things that have feeling, things that trigger smells, and the list will be extraordinarily easy to remember. Try that. Thanks.